The geopolitical situation, difficult financial environment, and high inflationary pressures have all had a substantial impact on the prospects for global growth. All these factors posed significant economic risks for Pakistan's economy as well. Devastating floods and political unrest further aggravated the situation. Thus, fiscal year 2023 has been a challenging year for Pakistan's economy. In fiscal year 2022, Pakistan's economy witnessed a high growth rate of 6.1%, however, it was unsustainable as it was largely driven by domestic demand, which was stimulated by expansionary fiscal policy and ended up with a high fiscal and current account deficit. Subsequently, the economy signaled excessive demand and overheating. At the beginning of the fiscal year 2023, the economy confronted four major challenges that posed threats to Pakistan's socio-economic growth. These challenges include regaining sustainable macroeconomic stability, reducing poverty, fiscal consolidation, and addressing weaknesses in the external account. The overall vision of the government is to achieve high and sustainable GDP growth with price stability over the medium term. The government is committed to implementing homegrown macroeconomic and structural reforms for creating job opportunities and reducing the poverty. The government is trying to rebuild confidence of investors by addressing macroeconomic imbalances through an optimal policy mix. At the same time, it is protecting poor people through adequately funded social safety nets and targeted subsidies. Pakistan received an unprecedented episode of torrential rains followed by flash flooding in July-August 2022 that affected 33 million people. Importantly, Sindh and Balochistan received 6 and 7 times more rain than normal, respectively. With flood basins saturated with water, the natural drainage system was overwhelmed, and a vast area of rich farmland and human settlements was flooded, and the consequences were disastrous. The floods submerged one-third of the country in water, more than 1,700 people were dead and 8 million were displaced. An estimated 8.4 to 9.1 million more people could be forced into poverty as a direct consequence of this catastrophic. The losses amounted to 4.8% of GDP. The recovery and reconstruction needs are projected at 1.6 times the budgeted national development expenditure for FY 2023. The present government came into power in April 2022 with a broad-based agenda for moving towards sustainable macroeconomic stabilization, which is primarily focused on rationalization of expenditures, removing unproductive subsidies to reduce burden on the budget, significant cuts in expenditures to reduce the budgetary deficit, increasing the tax and non-tax revenue of the government, and a tight monetary policy to fight inflation. The government has improved the Benazir Income Support Program, BISP, and other programs to enhance transparency so that the poor and vulnerable groups may be protected. Public-private partnerships have been encouraged as private investments are the main source of funding for economic development. The importance of sound governance, managerial and systemic mechanisms were also emphasized to ensure that the social sector investments remain cost-effective, thus, focusing on output-oriented service delivery. These measures, along with recent trends in most macroeconomic variables, suggest that the disciplined implementation of the macroeconomic stabilization program has started paying dividends in current fiscal year. The efforts contributed to containing the fiscal deficit at 3.6% of GDP during the first 3 quarters of FY 2023, a decrease from the 3.9% of GDP recorded in the corresponding period last year. Likewise, in July to March FY 2023, the primary balance achieved a surplus of 503.8 billion rupees, 0.6% of GDP, against the deficit of 447.2 billion rupees, minus 0.7% of GDP, experienced last year, attributed to a slowdown in the growth of non-markup expenditures. The current account turned to a surplus of $750 million in March 2023 and $18 million in April 2023, marking the first monthly current account surplus since 2020. The current account deficit is likely to decelerate from as high as $17.5 billion in FY 2022 to around $3.7 billion by the end of the outgoing fiscal year. However, Pakistan's economy still faces pressures from an uncertain global security situation, higher inflation driven by a spike in food prices, the bewildering stock market, perceptible contraction in large-scale manufacturing, lower than anticipated foreign inflows, and burgeoning absolute financing requirements. Resultantly, abatement of inflationary pressure remained persistent and depicting price stubbornness.